Boxer mesh is designed to work with real geometry. It is routine and simple to build a conjugate mesh for an HP turbine rotor, including the cooling air system, over-tip and under-hub regions. Fluid and solid phases are meshed simultaneously and with conformal interfaces. In this training video, a mid-span section mesh is created in near real time. A full fidelity, full span mesh would contain around 40 to 50 million cells and would be generated in a few hours depending on the number of parallel cores used. Hello and welcome to this Boxer mesh tutorial where we are looking at how to create conformal multi-region meshes. Let's load in a part from file. This part is in the standard Boxer BTF format, but of course Boxer mesh can import many different CAD file formats. We'll just change the initial appearance of the part from the default to shaded surfaces and read in the part. You can see this is a prismatic cooled turbine blade. We'll start by creating a single region mesh around the outside of the blade, representing the working fluid. Then we'll add the other regions later. So now we need to define the extents of the mesh domain and the background mesh size using the bounding box. We are going to specify that this mesh is Y-periodic. We need to set the minimum and maximum corner positions. When you click into the position dialog box, a grab handle appears in the scene. Use this drag handle to interactively position the extents of the bounding box. For more precise control, type the coordinates of the corner positions into the dialog boxes. And set the number of cells across the Y pitch of the mesh. By setting the mesh as Y-periodic, we will ensure that the mesh is conformally node matched across the Y-periodic faces. Now create the first region in our mesh. Call it fluid. Again, use the interactive drag handles to position the seed point. Because we want to mesh the external working fluid, the seed point needs to be inside the bounding box, but outside the envelope of the blade. Now let's refine the mesh in the areas of highest curvature and on the wetted surfaces. Add an edge refinement specifier. 2 levels of octree refinement for surfaces where the radius of curvature is less than 2 on the blade surface. Turn off the bounding box visibility and turn on the octree preview. This shows the size of the cell that will be created in the locality of the refinement. In this case, the blade leading and trailing edges. Add a second edge refinement specifier, this one at a refinement level of 3. Triggered by a local maximum curvature of 0.5. By leaving the feature tree subset blank, we apply this refinement specifier to all the geometry inside the bounding box. This captures the tighter curvature of the coolant passage corners. Now, for all the wetted surfaces, we add a surface refinement specifier for level 1 refinement. and Level 2 refinement for the coolant passage surfaces. That's all we need to create our mesh. Let's just check everything's going to be okay by just generating the octree mesh at this stage. The octree mesh is very fast to create and indicates that we have the right sort of mesh refinement scheme in place. There's the outline octree mesh of the blade surface. We create an ISO surface of constant Z, that's blade span, to view the octree volume mesh. And there's the single region octree mesh of the working fluid, showing the mesh refinement at the curved surfaces. Now we add the second fluid region, the coolant. We do this by just adding another region to the feature tree and setting the region seed points. We'll call this region coolant. It needs 3 seed points, one for each coolant chamber. Once again, use the drag handles to interactively place the seed point inside the bounding box and inside the coolant passage. You can edit the values by hand to make them precise. Regenerate the octree mesh and see the new mesh region created. To make it clearer, we change the octree render to scalar and change the rendering scalar to analysis region. The mesh is now coloured by which region it is assigned to. There is one more mesh region to add, the metal of the blade itself. We can specify this by creating a conjugate region. Call the conjugate region metal. A conjugate region is all the mesh inside the bounding box that is not connected to a specified region point. Normally that mesh is discarded, but with the conjugate region specified, the mesh is retained and assigned to the named region. Because the metal is quite thin, we include the patches that define the blade surface into this region. This ensures that there are enough cells across the thickness of the metal to define it correctly. Generate the octree mesh one more time. Now you can see the structure of a full fluid metal coolant conformal mesh. For a proper viscous mesh, we will need layer cells on the wetted surfaces. Add a body-fitted layer specifier. We'll have 12 cells in the layer stack at an expansion ratio of 1.2. And we'll fix the first cell height to be 0.0125. That means we get the same layer height on all the surfaces, regardless of the local octree cell size. Because we are now in multi-region mode, we need to explicitly tell BoxerMesh which regions to grow the layers into. We do this by dragging the fluid and coolant into the feature tree subset for the later specifier. That's all we need to do. Now go ahead and generate the body-fitted viscous mesh. We could do an intermediate step of generating just the inviscid mesh at this stage, and taking a closer look at the mesh without layers on it, but we'll just jump straight to the final layered mesh. The sequence here is shortened, but this mesh contains 472,000 cells and took about 30 minutes to create on a laptop using an Intel Core i7 processor. Once the mesh is created, we can take a look at it by changing the ISO surface from Octree mesh to body fitted mesh. There is the body fitted mesh. You can see that the mesh is conformal at the region interfaces, with one-to-one no connection. Let's just view the complete mesh. Remember that the mesh is also conformal across the Y periodic surfaces. So this mesh represents a fluid, solid, linear cascade domain. Finally, set up a mesh export to write the mesh to a file for further processing. In this case, we write out a Fluent format MSH file. You can add all the regions into one file in this format. Or you can write out individual regions to individual files. You can also export this entire process to a script file to create this mesh in batch mode. You can see that this mesh is just a thin slice of the whole blade span. In order to create a full span mesh, we just need to adjust the bounding box extents in the span-wise direction. In this case, that's the Z-axis. Once again, we can use the drag handles to adjust the bounding box. We can easily add additional mesh downstream of the blade by using the bounding box extrusion function. We will extrude the X-max face of the bounding box further downstream, with the cells expanding as they move further away from the trailing edge. Now recreate the mesh to get the full span model, including an extended downstream mesh section. This mesh contains 4.2 million cells. And we can visualize it using ISO surfaces and the boundary surfaces.